Before we open this file, a very necessary warning. The narrative we're about to enter involves the deliberate psychological manipulation and emotional abuse of an infant. While there's no physical gore in this case, the clinical, calculated terror inflicted upon a child in the name of science is profoundly disturbing. Listener discretion is mandatory. If you're sensitive to exploitation of children or the dark history of medical ethics, please turn back now. Welcome to High Frights. This is a specific kind of terror that doesn't come from a dark alley or a serial killer's crawl space. Sometimes, the monster standing in a brightly lit room at John Hopkins University holding a clipboard and wearing a white lab coat. Usually we look at crimes of passion or psychopathy, but in the 1920s, the scientific community proved that true cruelty could be entirely academic. A psychologist named John B. Watson didn't just study human fear, he decided to manufacture it from scratch, using a 9-month-old as his raw material. I've got the glass ready, and my lovely, lovely husband, who's also here, got his glass ready.
Definitely gonna need it because it sounds like this is gonna be quite a disturbing case to revolve around.
And just because the flowers match the case, we're gonna call them white widows today.
Funny. Yeah, cheers.
Cheers. A little bit of cough and ASMR before we get into it.
Not too good.
Oh crap, it's still burning. Okay. Oh jeez, sorry. Now that the smoke is thick and the mind is sharp, today the archives reveal the blueprints of a manufactured nightmare and the dark origins of modern psychological ethics. The file's open, and now let's begin. To understand the sheer arrogance of Dr. B. John Watson and his graduate student, Rosaline Rayner, I believe it's pronounced, we have to look at their goal. Watson was a behavioralist. He believed humans were completely programmable, blank slates that could be conditioned to feel anything. He needed a subject. He found Albert B., which is what they're calling him, since there's no history of this kid's name, a seemingly healthy, emotionally stable 9-month-old whose mother worked as a wet nurse at the hospital. At first, Albert was fearless. He showed him a white rat, a rabbit, a monkey, and burnt newspapers. Albert just smiled and reached out to play. But Watson wasn't interested in Albert's joy. He wanted his terror. The next time Albert reached out for a friendly white rat, Watson stood right behind the baby's head with a heavy steel bar and a hammer. He struck the metal. The deafening, violent clang shattered the room. Albert violently flinched and began to sob. Watson had just laid the foundation of a nightmare. In the archives of scientific history, this is known as casual conditioning. Or classical conditioning, apologies. But honestly, let's just call it what it is. This is psychological torture. Over,
Like, not
yeah, well, of a 9-month-old, yeah, of course. Of anyone, like, kid age or younger. Anyone considered a child, I feel like it's just torture too.
Yeah.
Over the next few years, every time the rat appeared, the hammer fell. Eventually, Albert didn't need to hear the noise. The moment the white rat was placed in the room, the baby would break down in hysterical tears, frantically trying to crawl away. Watson has successfully taken an innocent creature and turned it into a trigger for an existential dread. But the horror didn't just stop there. The fear generalized. Watson discovered that Albert was now terrified of anything resembling the rat. A rabbit, a fur coat, a dog, even a Santa Claus beard. Watson had programmed a glitch into this child's brain, teaching him that the world is full of soft, fuzzy nightmares. Here's where the cold detachment of the experiment kind of becomes criminal, or even more criminal, I feel like. Watson and Reiner had successfully broken the child's psyche, but did they put it back together? Of course not. This is the US medical system. Why would they? Before Watson could attempt to quote unquote decondition little Albert, the baby's mother took him and left the hospital. Some historians believe that she finally realized what they were doing to her son and fled. Watson just simply noted in his research, completely unbothered, that he had sent a permanently traumatized toddler out into the world. He had his data, his photos, and his horrifying film reels. Albert was just discarded collateral. When we look at at little Albert through the lens of history, we have to separate the fact from the psychological folklore. For decades, psychological textbooks claim that Albert grew up to have a lifelong phobia of furry things. But the truth is darker and deeply debated. In recent years, researchers tried to track down Albert's true identity. Some evidence suggests that it was Douglas Murrett, a tragically ill child that suffered from, I'm gonna butcher this name of this illness very harshly, I apologize. Hydrocephalus. And then this child sadly passed away at the age of just 6 years old, which, if true, means that Watson knowingly experimented on a neurologically impaired dying infant. Other researchers argue that it was William Barger, a man who lived a long life, but truly always had a deep, unexplainable, fear of dogs. Regardless of which child it was, the fact still remains that the experiment was scientifically sloppy and lacked a control group at all, and was built on an absolute exploitation of a working class mother and a vulnerable baby.
Really lacked anything. What the hell were we looking for?
Yeah, honestly, even the paperwork kind of just says he just kind of tortured the kid just to torture the kid. That's what they mean by it was a sloppy experiment.
No, alright.
It's like, it didn't prove anything. I mean, it did kind of prove that you can teach someone to fear something. But they didn't, I don't know.
I feel like that's kind of just common fucking knowledge.
Yeah, I feel like that's common sense anyway. The archive shows that the little Albert experiment is now taught not just for its findings, but for its momential warning. You cannot look at the American Psychological Association Code of Ethics without seeing Albert's shadow now. This case, alongside other historical abuses, eventually forced a mass shift in how we treat human subjects. It led to the creation of the institutional review boards and the ironclad rule of informed consent. Today, if a researcher tried to run a Watson's experiment, they would lose their license, their funding, and potentially face criminal charges. Watson tried to prove that he could control a human mind, but he ended up forcing the scientific community to develop a conscience. And honestly, that's all for this case. Smoke's starting to clear, and we've looked at a man who viewed a child's mind not as a sacred place, but as a playground for his own theories. We looked at the terrifying reality of what happens when abomination eclipses with empathy. John B. Watson became a famous advertising executive after he was fired from the academia. He was using his conditioning tactics to sell consumer goods, of course. A fitting end for a man who viewed humans as products, honestly. It's like, to be fair. But the legacy belongs to little Albert. His tears built the guardrails that now protect us today from any social or science experiment they want to do. Thanks for sticking through the deep end with me today. Honestly, this was kind of a heavier session because it's involving like torture of a child.
Literal.
Yeah, a literal infant. But honestly, the archives don't lie. Take care of your mental health. Go on a walk, pet a dog, hold your loved ones close. Stay safe, and always, always keep your eyes on the light. This has been High Frights. Good night. Yee.